Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vajjana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Vajjana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachariya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Yashoda Nandana Vajjana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yashoda Nandana Vajjana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Ashto Tarasaka Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Chalana Ravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Founder Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Ashto Tarasaka Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Premzakaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Sadhguru Bhaktivinoda Ki Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopakuna Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shri Vrindavan Ki Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Purushottam Chatra Jagadpuri Dham Ki Gangamai Ki Jamunamai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitya Goparimurani all glories to somebodies, all glories to somebodies, all glories to somebodies, all glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudevaya. Shonaka Uvacha Yad Aha No Bhavan Sutta Yad Aha No Bhavan Sutta Yad Aha No Bhavan Sutta Shata Bhagavattama Shata Bhagavattama Shata Bhagavatottama Yadaha no Bhavan Sutta Shata Bhagavatottama Chachara Tirtani Bhuvas Chachara Tirtani Bhuvas Chachara Tirtani Bhuvas Tyakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Tyakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Tyakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Chachara Tirtani Bhuvas Tyakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Shonaku Vacha Yadaha no Bhavan Sutta Chata Bhagavatottama Chatara Chaitani Bhuvas Chakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Shonaku Vacha Yadaha no Bhavan Sutta Chata Bhagavatottama Chachara Chaitani Bhuvas Chakta Bandhun Sudustyajan Shonaku Vacha Sri Shonaka Muni said, Yat as Aha you said, Na unto us, Bhavan your good self, Sutta O Sutta, Chata Vidura, Bhagavata Uttama, one of the topmost devotees of the Lord. Chachara, practiced. Tirtani, places of pilgrimage. Bhuva, on the earth. Tyaktva, leaving aside. Bandhun, all relatives. Sudustyajan, very difficult to give up. Translation. Shonaka Rishi after hearing all about the creation, inquired from Suta Goswami about Vidura. For Suta Goswami had previously informed him how Vidura left home, leaving aside all his relatives who were very difficult to leave. Responsively, Shaunaka Rishi, after hearing all about the creation, inquired from Suta Goswami about Vidura. For Suta Goswami had previously informed him how Vidura left home, leaving aside all his relatives who were very difficult to leave. Purport: the rishis headed by Shaunaka were more anxious to know about Vidura, who met Maitreya Rishi while travelling to the pilgrimage sites of the world. So if we look back to the previous verse, we can see that Suta Goswami is just about to reveal more information about the creation. But Shaunaka Rishi has respectfully interrupted him and said, well, okay, I've had enough of that. I want to hear something about Vidura. And it's kind of interesting because this then is like, I guess, like a sandhya. You know, it's a change from one conversation into a completely different conversation. And what we're going to find now is, okay, these are the concluding verses of the second canto. And so there's what, 3 more verses, I think. And then it goes into the third canto and the fourth canto. And the third and fourth canto are just completely conversations between Vidura and Maitreya. And there's quite a range of, really interesting range of topics they cover. I'll just briefly touch on them. And of course, we know and this is also quite significant because the first and second canto represent, does anyone know what they represent? Yeah, Padapadma, the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So now we're moving up to the thighs. The third canto and the fourth canto represent the 2 thighs of Krishna. So, and it's kind of, there's a whole structure, an analogy I guess it's compared to, is that all the cantos up to the 9th canto, they represent up to the chest, and then the 10th canto represents the beautiful face of the Lord. And just like the chapter we've just discussed is called, Prabhupada has entitled it, the Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. But then, what's his name? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, sometimes I just go blank on names. And he's entitled the 10 topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And we see also the 10 topics, Jiva Goswami, he explains for the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, is that the first 9 topics are all about helping to understand the Summum Bonum, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the same way, we see these first 9 cantos of the Bhagavatam are all focusing on helping us to understand Krishna. And there's an interesting discussion also in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita where it declares there that this form of Krishna, this is the most easily understood form of God. All these other forms of God are a little bit more difficult to understand, but this form of Krishna is the most easy to understand. So the whole Bhagavatam is focusing on helping us to understand, to approach and develop a loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So it's very significant that we're this step into the next topic, and so we're continuing the journey. Now, in the third canto, there's five topics. First off, we see in the third canto, the first few verses there is the meeting between Vidura and Uddhava. And this is really a beautiful discussion because Vidura at this point doesn't know that the Kauravas, the Yadus have left. He's not aware of it. But Uddhava knows this. And so Vidura, and it's kind of interesting also because it really is showing the character of Vidura, because Vidura is many years senior to Uddhava. Uddhava is quite young in comparison to Vidura. And so it's showing Vidura's humility, is that he's able to approach someone who's many years his junior, because traditionally speaking, the junior would approach the senior for guidance. This is the Vedic tradition, or the Vedic culture. But we see here how Vidura has approached Uddhava, and then after this conversation, because Uddhava is so overwhelmed with affection for Krishna, because he discusses Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and outside of Vrindavan, and he just becomes choked up. He can't speak anymore. He just becomes so overwhelmed by love from reciting these pastimes. So then he asked Vidura, please go to Maitreya. He's my senior. He's nearby. He was in Hardwar at the time, and so he went there. So again, showing Vidura's qualities, his determination to find out, but also his humility. And so he went to Hardwar, and that's where he met with Maitreya. And then we see in the third canto, again, it starts to talk about the Shaga and Vishaga, which is what's being discussed here. This is Shaga means like the first creation, the creation that's done by God, by Krishna. And the Vishaga is the second creation, which is more or less what's done by Lord Brahma and all his progeny or his offspring. Yeah? And then we go on to the pastimes of Lord Varaha. So this is a really interesting discussion also, because it talks about, we see the appearance of Jai and Vijay, or the cursing of Jai and Vijay to become Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, and how Hiranyaksha is creating great havoc with the earth, and then so, Lord Varaha appears, he fights with him, he kills him very easily, and then and discusses a little bit about Hiranyakashipu, but that's discussed in more detail in the 7th canto. And so there's a bit of a conversation there about the pastimes, and it also it's kind of interesting because in that pastime that's discussed there in the 3rd canto, this actually talks about 2 different forms of Varaha, but it doesn't so clearly spell it out, because the appearance of Varaha is what is called, as you were talking about yesterday, the Sweta Varaha Kalpa. So this is the Sweta means like this whitish form. But then we see the form that Hiranyaksha is fighting with is a, what color? Actually, it's called Nila. Nila is a bluish color. So it's a different incarnation of Varaha. So, and also we'll see here in a few verses' time that, excuse me, is that Sutta Goswami, he's been asked this question by Shaunaka Rishi and the sages at Naimisharanya, please, tell us, about this conversation of Vidura and Maitreya. And he answers by referencing a question that Parikshit Maharaj asked of Sukadev Goswami. But that he hasn't spoken about that yet. But in the beginning of the 3rd canto, he mentions that question. So we see it's not chronological, and you really have to, study the Bhagavatam very carefully to see how all these different things are fitting together. I'm not saying I study it carefully, but I just read what other people say, and you can see, okay, so we've got this discussion of Varaha and fighting with Hiranyaksha and appearing in it, but it's talking about 2 different incarnations that happened at very separate times, but it puts them together just to give us the understanding of the nature of the Lord and how Hiranyaksha, even though he had this very demonic mentality, how he was dealt with by the Lord and how he actually received the Lord's mercy, and it helped him to become purified, and eventually he got to the point where he achieved liberation through the Lord's mercy. But in the first 2, and this is also discussed in the Laghu Bhagavatamrita in great detail. In the first 2 appearances is Hiranyaksha, and then also same with Hiranyakashipu, and also in Ram's pastimes, because they didn't accept it was God, and they weren't chanting the name. But when they performed these activities, these demonic activities in Krishna's pastimes, because they were remembering his form, because they were chanting his name, they became purified, and actually they achieved liberation. Then it goes on to just discuss Kardama's household life, and this is a really interesting contrast, because just before discussing Kardama's household life, it's discussing the household life of Kashyapa and Diti. and showing the results of that household life, because deity, you know, she wasn't particularly self-controlled, and so she basically was pushing her husband to have sex at a time which was considered inauspicious. And as a result, we see these two great demons were born, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, and they created such a disturbance in the world. It's just phenomenal, the disturbance they created. Hiranyakashipu was such a powerful demon that he actually chased all the Devatas out of their residence, and he took over the whole running of the cosmos. He was so powerful that he took over the whole running of the cosmos. And the season, everyone was so terrified of him. Even the seasons were terrified of him. So much so that he liked spring, so it was always spring. Always the trees were bearing flowers, and it was always very attractive. And you know, some people might think this is a good thing, but because of his motives, because of his denial of Vishnu as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because of his intention to want to kill Vishnu, it wasn't actually a good thing. You know, because you have to, you know, it says you have to judge the thing by the result. Also, by the motive. You look at a person's motive. What is their motive? And his motive was to kill Vishnu. So this is not a positive motive. You know? There's two words that are used in Sanskrit. One is pratikul, one is anukul. So anukul means to be favourable. He had a favourable intention towards Vishnu. You know, someone has a favourable intention towards Vishnu, this is considered to be wonderful, even though they may not necessarily be so powerful or so advanced in Krishna consciousness, but they have a favourable intention. But someone like Hiranyakashipu, his intention was pratikul, or not favourable. He wanted to kill Vishnu. Therefore, this is considered to be impious or inappropriate. And then if we look at Kardama's household life with Devahuti, the result of his household life is that ultimately Lord Kapila was born. So we see it's giving a really interesting contrast between the two. Then just touching briefly on the fourth canto, we see it just discusses about Manu's daughters and you know, I think Manu had 16 daughters and talks about, no, that was Daksha had 16 daughters. It talks about the daughters of Manu, 3 daughters I think, Prasuti, Akuti, and maybe Devahuti, I can't remember all their names. It talks about who they married and some of the history of the marriage, and I think it was Prasuti who married Daksha. And then it also talks about Daksha's sacrifice and how you know, he thought that Lord Shiva was lesser than him, and therefore, you know, he was insulting towards Lord Shiva basically. Lord Shiva's not an ordinary personality. He's actually one of the great Prajapatis and a very, very elevated devotee. And actually, as it says, Vaishnavanam Yata Shambhu, that of all the Vaishnavas, Shiva is considered to be one of the greatest because of his complete absorption in Krishna. Even though externally, and this is an important lesson that we can understand from this pastime of Daksha, is that you can't really judge a person by their externals. You have to try to understand what's in their heart. And we see with someone like Lord Shiva, is he's completely absorbed in remembering Krishna. Therefore, we can understand he's a great devotee, even though externally, you know, he wears a garland of skulls. He's covered in ash from the crematorium. He hangs around with Bhutas and you know, hobgoblins and all sorts of, you know, degraded personalities. But why does he hang around with those people? He doesn't actually hang around with them. But why is he in the association with these people? It's because he's elevating them by his purity, by his God consciousness. He helps them to become elevated. So Lord Shiva, you can't, you know, just by externals, you can't understand you know, a person's nature. And we see also with our Vaishnava acharyas, I believe it was Jagannath Das Babaji, who would, or was it Gorkashore Das? I think it was, no, actually it was Gorkashore Das Babaji, who used to, you know, he would, you know, stay around the public urinals so people wouldn't come and bother him, so he would be absorbed in Krishna consciousness. He just didn't, because, you know, typically people would come to sadhus, and we see in Prabhupada's pastimes, you know, he was travelling on a train one time in India, and some people came to him and they asked him for blessings. And then Srila Prabhupada pointed to his sannyas disciples and said, here are my blessings. And immediately they went away because they didn't want to become sannyasis. They were just looking for some material benediction. And this is so much the case especially in India, is whenever they see a sadhu, they go looking for, oh, help my children to become successful, help them become, educated, or give me good children, or give me a good wife. But this is not the reason to approach a sadhu. The reason we approach a sadhu is because, the idea of sadhu means to cut. And what do they cut? They cut these knots of material attachment. But most materialistic people aren't looking for that. They're looking to increase the knots of attachment in the material world. Therefore, when they approach the sadhu, they go to the sadhu and ask them, give me material benedictions. But this is not what a sadhu does. A sadhu gives transcendental knowledge, and by that transcendental knowledge, it helps us to understand who I am and what is the goal of life. And this is the message of the Bhagavatam. The message helps the Bhagavatam, and even the Gita. One of the very fundamental instructions of the Bhagavad Gita is helping us to understand, who am I? I'm not this body, I'm Krishna's eternal servant. This is the fundamental instruction of the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada regularly makes the point, without understanding this fundamental instruction, there's no question of understanding further topics in spiritual life. So this is the basis. We need to understand this point. And whenever we go to a sadhu, then we inquire about this. How should I act? How should I, and we see there's so many conversations. And we'll get onto this in a minute, this is what the sages of Naimisharanya, this is why they're asking about Vidura. Okay, we've understood a little bit about the creation, this is nice, but we really want to understand how to go back to Godhead, how to understand what is our duty in this world, how to understand who I am. These are the real important instructions for someone who's interested in spiritual life. We don't approach spiritual life just to become physically strong or to become physically wealthy or have a good family or a beautiful wife. This is not the point of spiritual life at all. This is all material. This is all temporary. It will come and go. You can have the strongest body in the world. I remember going to. I used to go to in Melbourne. This MSAC. I used to go there. Every Wednesday to swim. To just try and maintain health. And there was this fellow there who was actually some sort of Victorian champion. You may have seen his pictures up there at the MSAC. I can't remember his name. Klim, yeah. Yeah, Michael Klim, yeah. But he was like a Victorian champion. Very, very strong, fit, healthy, But you used to see him around there. He's in his 60s or 70s then, Didn't look so strong and healthy then. He looked pretty sort of worn out, And this is the reality of having a material body, We may have been like strong and healthy and whatever in our youth, but when we hit our 60s and 70s and 80s, it all dwindles, it all starts to vanish, Your big muscles just, instead of being up here, they sort of slide down, And the belly, instead of being taut and trim, sort of starts to bulge, and, it's just, that's the reality. So, it's all temporary, so why put that much effort into it? Do what you have to maintain, to keep body and soul together so we can serve Krishna. But the point of spiritual life is to understand essentially who I am, what's my relationship with God, and, what is my duty, what should I do? And this is where the sages of Naimisharanya are heading. And then there's also the conversation about Adama's dynasty, one of the descendants of Manu was Adharma, and then Dhruva Maharaj, the very, very wonderful story of Dhruva Maharaj, and how he performed very, very severe tapasya in the forest. He was standing on his tippy toes with his hands up in his air. Very, very difficult tapasya. Then also talks about Anga, and of course we know Anga, he was a king, he was a descendant of Dhruva. He had a son named Vena, and this Vena was a rascal, basically. He was, tormenting everyone. And also it talks about how he was killed by the Brahmanas, and then they churned his body, and from his body was produced Prithu Maharaj. Prithu Maharaj was an incarnation of Godhead. And then also at the end of the fourth canto, it talks about this wonderful story of Prajnabahishat. Very, very wonderful story. And how, and again, this Narad Muni comes into this again. Narad, all these stories here, you can see Narad Muni is very much involved with Dhruv Maharaj, with you know, Daksha and all these different pastimes. We see Narad Muni is very much involved. And in this wonderful story of Prajnabahishat, Prajnabahishat and his sons, the Prachetas, he winds up talking about this, explaining this wonderful allegorical story about Puranjan. And then it goes on to the end, and he talks about, you know, the goat, and you know how Puranjan became a goat, and he, you know, it becomes a woman, and then there was a goat involved in the story. And at the one point, Prajnabahishat, he just like the light goes on, he realizes, oh my God, I'm that goat. You know, he just realizes how foolish he's been with all his endeavors to increase his material enjoyment. And we see throughout the Bhagavatam, there's so many stories like this, how, you know, great personalities have become absorbed in material life, and they're trying to expand their material influence and live like they'll never die. Just set up this great empire. I remember, you know, reflecting on this when I lived in Melbourne, driving down along the beach road through Brighton, and you see all these like massive houses, like palaces, you know, and they're always expanding them and increasing them, and they're building these houses like they're never going to die. But the fact is, we're all going to die. It's all temporary, you know. And so Prajnabahi, he was in this same kind of mood, how he was building this like empire, and then and just trying to enjoy life. And this name Prajnabahi means like that he'd done so many sacrifices, because when you do sacrifices like the Vedic sacrifice, the priest will sit on kusha grass. So the name Prajna or Bahishat means that he'd done so many sacrifices that the earth was covered with kusha grass from these sacrifices. So he was just constantly doing these sacrifices. And his purpose in doing sacrifices was to increase his material enjoyment and to ensure that he was awarded a place in the heavenly planets after leaving this body. But then after hearing this allegorical story from Narad Muni, he realized the futility of it all. Therefore he gave it up and practiced devotional service. So many wonderful stories, and just to sort of give you like a look forward of what's coming up. So, and the point that's really interesting out of this verse here is you know, the sages were asking Sutta Goswami about this conversation with Vidura, with Maitreya, and does anyone know when this appeared? When he raised the topic? When was this topic about Vidura and Maitreya raised in previous section of the Bhagavatam? Anyone know? 13th chapter of the first canto. No, that's described in this first chapter coming up in the next canto. But we see in the 13th chapter, verse 1 and 2. You know, that's the chapter entitled Dhritarashtra Quits Home. So Vidura, feeling compassion upon his brother, because he heard about, you know, what had happened with the Kauravas and that, and he knew the situation that Dhritarashtra was so attached. He comes back to, you know, after all his time on pilgrimage, he comes back to Hastinapur and enters the palace. And it's really interesting. I'll just read some of the points that were raised there. So these are the first two verses of the 13th chapter of the first canto. We see that Sutta Goswami explains that he was traveling on pilgrimage and he received knowledge of the destination of the self from Maitreya. So he was, you know, he inquired from Maitreya, and he became well versed in the subject of the knowledge of the destination of self. You know, he's completely satisfied with his increase, and also he became established in knowledge of the transcendental loving service of Krishna. He became fixed as a devotee, and so that's all that Sutta Goswami said. But this piqued the interest of the sages of Naimisharanya. They wanted to know more about this. Because if you reflect back at the beginning of the first canto, they asked 6 questions. And the questions are things like, okay, what is the goal of life? And how to achieve that goal of life. Give us the essence of all scriptures. Because the Vedic text, if you read in the Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami explains how vast the Vedic texts are and how many thousands upon thousands of books there are. And as we see, Krishna says, by all the Vedas I am to be known. So you have to study all the Vedas to understand this. But the sages of Naimisharanya, they're saying to Sutta, give us the essence of all these scriptures so that we can understand what is the ultimate good for the people in general. So this is their focus. This is where they're going back to. And of course they're asking, there's 2 questions about the pastimes of Krishna, also about his Purusha avatars, about his Leela avatars, things like that. So they're really wanting to know the essence, how to achieve God consciousness as quickly as possible, because right in the beginning there's that verse, that this is the iron age of Kali, a very difficult age. People are lazy, quarrelsome, misguided, unlucky, short-lived, and above all, always disturbed. This is the nature of people in this age. And so they're saying, okay, difficult age, how can we get the shortcut version? How can we get this information in a most succinct and most digestible manner? Yeah? And so that's what's happening here. The Bhagavatam is being presented. And then we see that Prabhupada explains in his purport to the 2nd verse of chapter 13 of the first canto that Vidura was convinced by Maitreya that the summum bonum of life is to be finally situated in transcendental loving service of Krishna. So summum bonum means what is the ultimate good. And Prabhupada uses this term quite a bit, this summum bonum. And there's actually a very interesting lecture series from Ravindra Swaruprabhu where he discusses this term, summum bonum, and how Prabhupada uses it. And then so we see that Maitreya had, through the talks with Vidura became convinced of what was the goal of life. And this is what the sages of Naimisharanya, this is what they wanted to find out about, that they were really interested to know about this, even though there was only 2 verses, 17 chapters ago, which is kind of interesting. It's like such a long time ago. If you figure how long it took to talk, this whole thing, it might have been the day before or something like that. Yet they were really interested to know. Obviously they learnt about the creation and so many other things there. But these points that were raised 17 chapters ago were very, very interesting to them, because that's what they wanted to know. They wanted to know what was the ultimate goal of life, what was the ultimate good for all people, and what was the essence of the scriptures. And the essence of scriptures, as we're seeing, is being unfolded here, is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and this is the real conversation now is going to start about Vidura and Maitreya's conversation and all the things they discussed. And so it's very, very interesting. And of course, Vidura, he's quite an extraordinary personality as well. We understand there's a nice story that Prabhupada actually tells in the 13th chapter of the first canto, how previously Vidura was actually Yamaraj. And what had happened was there was this sage in a kingdom. His name was, sometimes he's called Mandavya, sometimes he's called Mandukya. It's the same person. You'll see this pastime, these names seem to be used interchangeably. And he was performing his tapasya, and a criminal, when he was in his sort of hermitage, a criminal ran into the cottage and hid somewhere in the cottage. And the constables, the king's constables came, and as was the way with the constables in those days, they just arrest everyone, don't ask questions, just arrest everyone, take them down to the jailhouse. And so the time for punishment came, And the punishment in those days was to impale them on a lance. And this was, just as this was about to happen, the king heard that, they're going to impale Mandavya Muni. And so he immediately sent his representatives and said, stop this, you can't do that. And he went down himself and he apologized. He said to the sage, I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. You're a venerable rishi, and this should never happen, and please forgive us. And so he was okay with what the king was saying, but then immediately he went to visit Yamaraj. This shows you how powerful a sage he is. He could actually go to Yamaraj's planet. And he went to visit Yamaraj, and he questioned Yamaraj's reasons for doing this. Why was I about to be impaled on a lance? And Yamaraj explained that actually when you were a child, you impaled an insect with a blade of grass. Therefore you had to suffer like this. And Mandavya, he questioned, he said, but I was younger than 5 years old. How can you give punishment to children that are younger than 5 years old? Because we understand that children that are younger than 5, they don't get karma for their activities. They're just suffering the effects of their previous karma, but they don't get karma for their activities. But above 5, that's when the karma starts to happen. So then he cursed Yamaraj. He said, because you have a mentality like a Sudra, you should take birth as a Sudra. And so this is what happened, is Ambika, who was one of the wives of Vichitravirya, but Vichitravirya died basically from consumption. He overindulged in all the opulences of being the king, and he died from consumption. So then what happened was Bhishma and what was her name? The daughter of the fisherman? Satyavati, thanks for Satyavati had a conversation. Well, what are we going to do, because there's no children, and we need to have because they're very concerned about the lineage would continue, because these royal lineages were not just like ordinary family lineages. These were people who were actually qualified to rule the planet. And so it was very important that the lineage continued. So Bhishma and Satyavati had a conversation about it, and Satyavati recalled that she had this blessing, she had this son who from Parashuram Muni, and his name was Vyasadeva. And Bhishma was like overawed when he heard the name of Vyasadeva, and he offered respects in that. So they called Vyasadeva, and Vyasadeva impregnated Vichitravirya's widows. He had 2 wives, Ambika and Ambalika, I think. Anyhow, so the first 2 times that he impregnated was Pandu and Dhritarashtra were the result. The 3rd time that they came, he came to have union with Ambika, but she really found it hard to tolerate the appearance of Vyasadeva, because he was like a sage living in the forest and things like that, and wasn't sort of so concerned about his hair and all that sort of stuff. And so she sent her maidservant, who was a Sudrani, and she served Vyasadeva very respectfully, and Vyasadeva was pleased by that, so he impregnated her, and he said, actually, your child will be a great devotee, and that was Vidura. So Vidura wasn't, he wasn't qualified to be the king, but he was still a great devotee, and also Dhritarashtra had very great affection for him, and he was, he was also a person who was very righteous, and he saw the dealings of Duryodhana, and also Dhritarashtra's affection for his sons, which was inappropriate because they were involved in sinful activities. We see right in the beginning of the was it here? Yeah, it was in the first chapter. He tells him to get rid of this son, who's actually just an offense personified. But he was very protective of the Pandavas, because the Pandavas were righteous. So just a little bit of a background of Vidura. He's a very, very great soul, And yeah, anyway, finishing there. Any comments, questions at all?
Very informative, thank you.
Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Ko Premanandi.